Hey there, welcome to Animal Attacks. Today, I'm looking at rich people who use their money to its fullest only to be attacked by a dangerous wild animal. From a night ride on a ski mobile that became a fatal encounter with a polar bear to a beach trip that became a blood pool. But let's start with two men who genuinely believed that enough money could buy them past the instincts of an entire lion pride. It was August the 18th, 2018, and northern Tanzania was deep in the heart of its dry season. The grass across the plains had burned down to a pale, brittle gold. The ground beneath it cracked into a fine network dust that rose in small clouds with every footstep. Visibility stretched for what felt like miles under a flat, punishing morning light. The kind of light that makes distant objects look closer than they are and closer objects look smaller than they should. It's the kind of landscape that looks completely empty right up until the moment it isn't. And that gap between appearance and reality is exactly where this story lives. Preston Hargrove was 55 years old and Nathaniel Cross was 52. The two men had spent nearly 3 decades building a private equity firm together out of Texas,
growing into something, modest into something, substantial enough that both of them had long since stopped hearing the word no apply to anything they wanted.
Money had a way of making obstacles temporary for them, dissolving problems that would have stopped almost anyone else in their tracks. Friends of theirs would later describe the trip to Tanzania as fairly typical. For the two of them, an expensive, exclusive experience, booked at the last minute with an expectation that exclusivity meant access to whatever they decided they wanted to see. They had arranged a private safari through a small, independent concession, the kind of outfit that survives on a handful of high-paying clients each season, rather than steady institutional bookings. Before either man had even landed in the country, Preston had offered the concession's owner a cash payment large enough to make a financially stretched small operator seriously consider it in exchange for arranging a completely private, unsupervised walking safari that would put both men far closer to arresting lion pride than any regulation in the region permitted.
I think this is exactly where this story stops being an accident waiting to happen and starts being a decision made with both eyes wide open.
The owner initially said no. He knew, the way anyone running walking safaris professionally knows, that predator encounters follow strict distancing rules for a reason that has nothing to do with bureaucracy and everything to do with keeping people alive. Every guide employed by the outfit objected as well, and they weren't quiet about it. They told the owner directly that no amount of money justified deliberately closing the distance on a lion pride on foot, without vehicles, without the usual buffer that keeps these encounters survivable. But the owner was running a small operation in an industry where one bad season can close the business permanently, and he eventually gave in, warning his own staff that refusing wealthy clients outright could put all of their jobs at risk. It's honestly frustrating to sit with that detail, because the guides who understood the danger best were also the ones with the least power to actually stop it from happening. Fearing for their positions, they reluctantly agreed to accompany the owner and the two businessmen out into the grassland. Lions in that region live in prides that defend territory, and more specifically their young, with a level of commitment that doesn't leave room for hesitation. Adult lionesses do the majority of the pride's hunting and nearly all of its active defense, and their response to a perceived threat near a cub is never gradual. It is immediate and delivered at speed, with the nearest lionesses closing on the source of the disturbance within seconds of the alarm being raised. Distance is essentially the only real protection a person has around a resting pride, because once that buffer collapses, there's no version of the encounter where reasoning or retreat changes the outcome. That's the part that always sits heaviest with me. There's no negotiating with an instinct that fast. On the morning of the 18th, the group came across a pride resting in scattered patches of tall grass. The guides repeatedly told everyone to hold their distance, using the same instructions they'd have given any client on any ordinary day. But Preston and Nathaniel had paid specifically for proximity, not for a story about proximity told to them later over drinks, and in a blink of an eye, the two started going towards the pride. The guides started vocalizing to halt, but the two stood their ground, stating that they paid for this experience and they have the right to do so. Without retaliation, the owner followed, and so did the other guides. The group began advancing anyway, slowly, step by step. Safari rules strictly state that a visitor should not get in close proximity of these animals without proper training. But with the power of money, they were able to do so. What none of them had noticed, hidden in taller grass roughly 25 feet from where the adults were resting, was a single cub. Preston, unaware it was even there, ended up walking to within a few yards of it. The cub stood and gave off a distress call. That was all it took. Within seconds, the nearest lionesses closed the distance at a dead run to defend it. The guides shouted and moved to physically pull both men back, aware that gunfire this close would likely do nothing but agitate the pride further and had no realistic chance of stopping a charge already in motion. One guide who rushed forward to intervene directly suffered serious injuries before he managed to retreat to relative safety. The owner, watching the exact scenario his own guides had warned him about play out in real time, ordered the remaining staff to fall back rather than risk losing anyone else to a decision that had never been theirs to make in the first place. They escaped to the vehicles and radioed for help as soon as they were clear. When Preston and Nathaniel failed to return to the lodge that evening, the staff traveling with them reported both men missing. Wildlife authorities assembled a team of experienced rangers and search personnel the following morning, and they recovered both men's bodies near the site of the attack. The injured guide survived his wounds. Investigators later determined that the safari owner had knowingly violated established walking safari regulations in direct exchange for money, and he was convicted of criminal negligence as a result. The guides who had objected from the very beginning were treated in the proceedings largely as witnesses rather than participants. Their repeated objections on record working in their favor once investigators reconstructed how hard they pushed back against the plan before ever setting foot in the grass. Two men with nearly unlimited financial resources spent a fortune buying their way past a warning that every professional in that camp had already given them for free, and none of that money meant anything at all to a lioness protecting her cub.
One death happened in broad daylight, on open grassland, surrounded by people actively trying to stop it. The next happened in complete privacy, in still water, to a man who was entirely convinced that stillness meant safety.
It was February the 9th, 2017, and northern Zambia had settled into the cooler, drier stretch of its year mornings, crisp enough to warrant a light jacket, afternoons mild and comfortable in a way that made outdoor work feel easy. It's exactly the kind of pleasant weather that makes people forget how much danger a landscape can still be holding beneath a calm surface. Harrison Bellamy was 61 years old, a retired real estate developer who had purchased a sprawling riverside estate specifically to enjoy mornings like this one in peace, away from the pace of the career he'd just left behind. The property included a substantial natural pond connected underground to a nearby river during the region's seasonal flooding, a detail that should have mattered far more to Harrison than it apparently did. He had plans to transform that pond into the centerpiece of the entire estate, installing a large marble fountain surrounded by carefully designed landscaping. Local contractors and workers told him more than once, and in fairly direct terms, that the water needed a proper wildlife survey conducted before any construction began, since the pond hadn't been formally inspected in years. Harrison dismissed the recommendation. In his mind, still water simply meant unused water, an assumption built entirely on how the pond looked rather than on what might actually be living beneath its surface.
I don't think most people fully appreciate how much a body of water can be concealing in total silence. And that gap between appearance and reality is what makes this particular case so unsettling to sit with.
Before construction crews arrived, Harrison decided to enter the pond himself to place marker stakes where the fountain's foundation would eventually go. Nile crocodiles are ambush predators. built entirely around patience rather than pursuit. They're capable of remaining almost completely motionless for extended stretches of time, submerged with little more than their eyes above the waterline, waiting for prey to come within striking range before launching an explosive, high-speed attack that can drag a target beneath the surface in a single continuous motion. Unlike a pride of lions, crocodiles don't announce their territory. There's no roar, no visible display, no distance to read and respect. There's simply water that looks completely empty until the instant it isn't. Honestly, that total absence of warning is what makes crocodile encounters different from almost every other animal on this list. There's no window to reconsider anything. Wading chest deep into the water while taking his measurements, Harrison unknowingly stepped directly into the territory of a large crocodile that had entered the pond through the flood channels months earlier and had simply never left. The attack came fast and without any preceding signal, a sudden strike that pulled him beneath the surface before he had any real opportunity to react or call out. A housemaid, glancing toward the pond from inside the main house, heard violent splashing and saw him struggling briefly before he disappeared under the water entirely. She screamed for help, alerting the estate security staff and other employees who called emergency services immediately. Wildlife officers located and recovered Bellamy's remains later that same afternoon after tracking down the crocodile responsible. Investigators concluded that no environmental wildlife assessment had ever been carried out on the pond, despite the clear and repeated recommendations from local contractors who had flagged the issue directly to him. In the aftermath, local wildlife officers and contractors in the area began actively warning other property owners along the same river system to have connected ponds and waterways checked before entering them, particularly during and after flood season, when animals can move into new territory through channels that aren't always visible from the surface. It became something closer to informal common knowledge in that community after this check the water first, regardless of how still it looks. A man with the financial means to hire any specialist he wanted decided that an inspection simply wasn't worth the delay. If the crocodile story is fundamentally about ignoring a direct warning,
The next one is about believing a lie someone else told you.
and paying for that lie with a life that wasn't even the one who invented it. It was November the 4th, 2021. And the private estate where Bianca Vale lived, just outside a small town in the eastern Free State region of South Africa, sat under the kind of manicured, climate-controlled comfort that serious money buys when it wants to feel completely insulated from risk. Bianca was 26 years old, a luxury influencer who had built an entire career and a massive following around showcasing extravagant purchases that almost no one else could access. After months of pushing for an exotic pet, unlike anything her audience had ever seen from another creator, she convinced her billionaire father to purchase a lion for their private estate. Her father believed, at every stage of the transaction, that he was purchasing a legally captive bred animal from a licensed breeding facility. What he actually purchased through an illegal wildlife dealer was a lion that had spent nearly its entire life inside a breeding compound with very little meaningful handling or human interaction. The dealer had built the sale around forged permits, copied almost exactly from templates used by a legitimate government-registered breeder in the same province, close enough in formatting, stamps, and paperwork that the transport company and a customs broker involved in moving the animal both treated the documents as routine and didn't flag them for the kind of deeper verification that would normally involve directly contacting the listed facility. It's a loophole that exploited trust in paperwork over actually confirming the source.
And I think that's what makes this one so frustrating. The fraud wasn't specially sophisticated.
It just happened to look exactly like something everyone involved had seen 100 times before and stopped questioning. A large enclosure had recently been completed on the property specifically for the lion, and a professional handling team had been scheduled to arrive the following morning to run standard safety checks before anyone had contact with the animal. Bianca, eager to see the lion she'd spent months asking for, didn't wait for the team to arrive. African lions, regardless of how they were raised or by whom, are not domesticated animals in any meaningful sense, and a lion that has just been transported and placed into a completely unfamiliar enclosure experiences significant, measurable stress in that period. That stress typically manifests as heightened defensiveness. And an animal in that state does not reliably distinguish between an actual threat and a person simply approaching with friendly intentions.
I think that detail alone, that she went in before anyone with actual training had even seen the animal,
Says almost everything about how rushed this entire process was from its very first step. Believing the lion was already comfortable around humans based on what she'd been told about its background, Bianca entered the enclosure herself through a service gate meant only for staff. It wasn't comfortable around anyone. The recently transported animal was highly stressed and defensive in its new environment. As Bianca approached to greet it directly, the lion charged and fatally attacked her before employees stationed outside the enclosure could safely intervene. The investigation that followed uncovered a wider wildlife trafficking network built around forged paperwork, modeled on legitimate breeders, and several people connected to that network were arrested as a result, including the broker who had waved the documents through without a direct call to verify them. Her father avoided any criminal charges once investigators confirmed he had been genuinely deceived by paperwork specifically manufactured to pass as legitimate. Money bought Bianca access to a lion nobody had properly vetted. The next story is about money, buying something arguably even less appropriate for a corporate office. Some of the most dangerous venomous snakes on the planet kept behind custom glass, specifically to impress visitors during business meetings. It was April the 30th, 2019, and in Johannesburg, South Africa, technology executive Evelyn Botha, 41 years old, had just finished spending millions of dollars designing an extravagant corporate headquarters meant to become one of the city's most recognizable office buildings. Wanting her personal office to stand out from every other executive suite in the building, she commissioned custom-built glass reptile exhibits and filled them with some of the rarest venomous snakes available anywhere in the world, housed in a private wing of the building that wasn't open to general staff or building inspectors on any regular schedule. Through an illegal exotic animal broker, she acquired several black mambas after being falsely assured they had already become accustomed to regular handling and posed minimal risk during controlled demonstrations. Black mambas are among the fastest moving venomous snakes on the planet, and they deliver a highly potent neurotoxic venom capable of progressively shutting down the nervous system's control over breathing.
there is no meaningful domesticated or calmed version of a wild-caught black mamba, regardless of how it has been housed or fed.
Captivity does not soften a species built entirely around speed, precision, and a defensive bite designed to end a confrontation immediately. It genuinely baffles me that anyone believed a private executive wing was an appropriate setting for that kind of animal, let alone one meant to double as a conversation piece. Going back to one of our episodes where Miss Cat Lady pointed out that these rich people keep wild animals as entertainment really reminds us how out of touch these people in these stories are. The evening before an important meeting tied to a major company acquisition, and hours before the licensed venomous reptile specialists were scheduled to arrive and complete the exhibit's final safety procedures, Evelyn let herself into the private wing to check on the snakes personally. She was wearing a pair of thick leather handling gloves she'd had custom made for exactly this kind of demonstration. And when one of the black mambas struck at her hand, she felt the impact, but assumed the leather had done its job and stopped the fangs from actually reaching skin. It hadn't. The gloves were thick, but not remotely rated for a species capable of striking with that much force and penetration. And she walked away from the enclosure genuinely convinced nothing had gotten through. By the following morning, during the acquisition meeting itself, the first real symptoms started to show: slurred speech, difficulty focusing her eyes, a growing heaviness in her limbs that she initially wrote off as exhaustion from preparing for the deal. Several employees in the room noticed something was clearly wrong within minutes and urged her to stop the meeting and get to a hospital immediately.
I keep thinking about how obvious it must have looked to everyone else in the room, and how convinced she still must have been about those gloves to keep waving off people who were clearly seeing something she couldn't feel it yet.
By the time she finally agreed to leave for the hospital, the neurotoxin had already progressed too far for treatment to reverse the damage. Authorities traced the snakes back to an international illegal wildlife trafficking operation, resulting in several arrests across multiple jurisdictions. Safety regulators also reviewed existing rules around private ownership of highly venomous reptiles inside commercial buildings in the direct aftermath of the incident. A woman with every resource necessary to do this legally, safely, and through licensed professionals instead chose spectacle over caution, trusting a pair of gloves over the animal's actual biology. That's the part that stays with me. Everyone else in that room seemed to understand something was seriously wrong well before she was willing to admit it to herself. From a private executive wing in a crowded city to one of the coldest, most isolated environments on the entire planet, the next story didn't require a broker and it didn't require a lie. It only required one piece of safety equipment left behind at the lodge. It was January the 22nd, 2022, and the remote luxury lodge Cassandra Whitmore had rented sat on the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard, deep inside a winter where genuine daylight barely exists, and the cold functions as a constant physical presence in every part of daily life. Cassandra was 31 years old, an investment heiress, traveling with 3 close friends for what was meant to be a quiet winter getaway. Upon arrival, lodge staff instructed every single guest to carry either a rifle or a flare pistol anytime they left the building, explaining clearly that polar bears move freely through the surrounding wilderness at all times of year, regardless of season or weather. Polar bears in that region are genuine apex predators with essentially no natural fear of humans. And unlike many large mammals that instinctively avoid people, they will actively investigate and, in certain conditions, pursue potential prey rather than retreating from it. A disabled snowmobile sitting motionless in the dark with a person standing beside it is precisely the kind of stationary, vulnerable target that draws sustained attention from an investigating bear. Confident that a short snowmobile ride back to the lodge didn't justify the extra hassle of carrying protection, Cassandra left without any rifle or flare pistol at all. It's such a small decision in the moment, leaving one piece of equipment behind on a table.
And it's exactly the kind of choice that feels completely harmless right up until it very much isn't.
On the return trip after dark, Cassandra's snowmobile broke down several miles behind the rest of her group. Strong winds, combined with the noise of the remaining engines, kept her friends from realizing she had come to a stop. Alone beside the disabled machine in total darkness, she had no way to see anything approaching from the surrounding terrain, and critically, no way to defend herself once something did. That image alone, of someone standing completely helpless in absolute darkness with nothing in hand to protect themselves, is honestly difficult to shake even now. When her friends eventually realized Cassandra was missing, they returned along the route and found blood near the abandoned snowmobile before immediately contacting the governor of Svalbard's emergency services. Search teams later located the responsible bear's food cache a short distance from the scene, where Cassandra's body was ultimately recovered. A tool that weighed next to nothing and would have taken mere seconds to grab on the way out the door sat back at the lodge the entire time, and that's what makes this particular case sting the most. The actual precaution required was almost absurdly simple. The next story trades ice and darkness for open ocean water, a different kind of isolation entirely, and a predator that doesn't need the cover of night to find someone who has drifted too far from the safety of the group. It was June the 12th, 2016, and Dominic Gale, 36 years old, was a private equity manager, had chartered an elaborate luxury fly-in snorkeling excursion to a remote reef in the Bahamas for a group of his wealthy friends. The seaplane touched down beside a support skiff that remained stationed nearby the entire time everyone was in the water, specifically as a safety measure for the group. Dominic, however, wanted especially dramatic underwater footage for himself, and he repeatedly swam farther from both the aircraft and the support skiff than anyone else in the group, despite multiple direct warnings from the crew to remain close together.
I think this is generally the one story where I keep asking myself why the footage mattered more to him than the people actively telling him to come back.
Oceanic white-tip sharks are wide-ranging, open ocean predators well known among researchers for investigating unfamiliar activity in deep water, often approaching swimmers or floating objects out of pure curiosity before eventually deciding whether to commit to an actual attack. Distance from a boat or from the rest of a swimming group significantly increases the odds that a shark's initial exploratory approach escalates into a serious bite, simply because there's no one nearby positioned to interrupt the encounter early. Open water, unfortunately, doesn't care in the slightest how much someone paid for their private charter. While filming alone in noticeably deeper water than the rest of the group, Dominic became fully isolated from everyone else on the excursion. An oceanic white-tip, investigating the disturbance he was creating, approached and delivered a powerful exploratory bite. Although Dominic attempted to swim back toward the support skiff immediately afterward, the severity of the injury, combined with significant blood loss and the sheer distance he had put between himself and any help, meant that rescuers simply couldn't reach him in time before he collapsed in the water. It's a genuinely hard image to sit with.
Swimming toward help that you can actually see in the distance, knowing full well that the distance itself is the exact thing working against you.
Emergency responders recovered Dominic's body later that same day, and investigators concluded that the excursion operator had failed to maintain proper swimmer supervision under open ocean conditions, a finding that prompted stricter safety procedures for similar fly-in snorkeling operations going forward across the region. He wanted footage no other creator had, and the very same instinct that pulled him away from the group is exactly what left him without anyone close enough to help when it mattered most. Footage taken from his camera were not released to the public, in agreement with his family's request. The final story on this list isn't about someone wandering into danger by accident, and it isn't about someone else's lie catching up with them either. It's about a man who created the danger himself with his own rifle, and then walked directly into the middle of what he'd started. It was September the 3rd, 2015, and Vincent Carlisle, a mining magnate, wanted a massive elephant trophy for his mansion, badly enough that when he couldn't secure a legal hunting permit through any normal channel, he secretly hired an illegal poaching group operating near a protected reserve in Mozambique. He'd reportedly been turned down for permits in 3 separate countries that year alone, each rejection tied to tightening restrictions on trophy hunting of older bulls, the very animals poachers and legal hunters alike prize most for their tusk size. Vincent was 58 years old, and rather than waiting comfortably at a lodge for the poachers to return with a trophy already secured, he insisted on joining the expedition personally, on foot, to select the animal himself. Associates who spoke to investigators afterward described him as a man who didn't trust other people to make decisions on his behalf, even decisions as simple as which elephant to shoot, and who considered watching from a distance to be beneath him.
I have to say, out of every story on this entire list, this is the one where the person in question created the entire dangerous situation from absolutely nothing.
African bush elephants live in tight, highly social family herds that respond to distress calls with immediate, coordinated action rather than scattered panic. A wounded or distressed elephant's trumpeting call can draw multiple herd members toward the exact source of the disturbance within moments of the call being made And an already agitated herd reacting simultaneously to gunfire and a wounded animal's cries becomes an environment with essentially no safe entry point left for anyone on foot. This isn't aggression in the casual sense. People often assume it's a defense mechanism specifically built to protect the herd, and it doesn't pause to sort out who actually fired the shot in the first place. Matriarchs, in particular, are known to lead these charges, and a herd can close a gap of over 100 meters in well under 15 seconds once it commits. After tracking a mature bull elephant through dense terrain, Vincent fired the first shot himself, seriously wounding the animal instead of killing it outright. Trackers with the group later said the bull had been spotted feeding alone at the tree line, which was exactly why it had been chosen. What none of them realized until it was too late was that alone rarely means alone for long, with elephants this size. The injured bull retreated into thick vegetation while producing loud, sustained distress trumpets that carried across the surrounding bush. Hidden nearby the entire time was the rest of its family herd, grazing just out of sight in cover so dense the poaching group never registered their presence. Hearing both the distress calls and the gunfire, multiple elephants immediately charged toward the source of the disturbance. Vincent, who had moved ahead on foot to follow the wounded bull deeper into the vegetation, was caught completely in the open and fatally trampled before he could make it back to the waiting vehicles. Members of the group later told investigators the entire pursuit, from first shot to the herd's arrival, lasted less than 2 minutes.
I think this is generally the one story here where the animal did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was Vincent who manufactured the entire emergency from the very first shot.
The surviving members of the poaching group fled back to their trucks and later contacted authorities once they had escaped the charging herd themselves. Wildlife officers recovered Vincent's body the following day, and the resulting investigation led to the arrest of every surviving member of the poaching operation on charges related to illegal hunting, wildlife trafficking, and trespassing inside a protected habitat. Conservation groups later pointed to the case as a rare instance where an illegal hunt was stopped not by enforcement, but by the very animals it targeted. A man with enough money to buy almost anything he wanted through entirely legal channels instead chose to buy his way around the one law specifically designed to stop him, and the herd he wounded made absolutely certain he never got the chance to walk away from that decision.